Welcome back to token-based authentication. In this lesson, we'll take a look at handling some of the errors that we get back from the server. First, we'll take a look at some of the errors that we can expect, and then we will implement both login and register error handling. Let's get started. So, what errors might happen in our application? Thinking about our login component, if a user attempts to log in with invalid credentials, an invalid email and password combination, then we will be getting an error back from the server. If we think about our register component, we could be receiving an error if a user tries to create an account with an email that already exists, or if they try to create an account with a password which is in an invalid format, if it's too short, for example. Now, these are just some of the errors that might occur, not an exhaustive list. Remember, we are using a mock server, which is super simplified. Now, before we implement the error handling behavior, let's get an understanding for how our mock server is behaving. If we take a look at the login endpoint, we can see here we are reading the database, finding out what user is stored there. Then we are checking if the user credentials that the client sent us exist in our database. And if not, we're sending back a 401 status code with this error message: invalid login, please try again. Great, now let's take a look at the register endpoint behavior. Here, we have an array to collect our errors. And below that, we're checking if the email already exists in the database, and we're doing some minimal validation for the password length and pushing errors in both of these cases. And if any errors do exist, then we're sending them back with a 400 status code. Now that we understand that mock server behavior, we can implement the error handling in our Vue front end. We'll start off with the login error handling, which means we will be going inside of our login user component. And if we scroll down here, in our login method, just below the then, we want to catch any error that we do receive from the server. For now, we're just going to console log the response that we got back. Let's head into the browser to see this in action. If we log in with an invalid email and try to log in, you do see we have the 401 status code. And inside this data, we have that error, which the server responded with. Now we want to take that error and store it locally in this component. So we will simply add an error property to our data. And instead of console logging here, we'll switch this out to this.error equals error.response.data.error. Now, when we get it back, we're storing it in our data, which means we just need to display it within our template, which we will do inside of a p tag. As a side note, if you look in the global styles, all p tags are going to be automatically styled red. You'll see why I say that in just a minute. Now, if we go into the browser and check this out, logging in with an invalid email, and hit login, here we have that red error message. Perfect. Now we can implement our register error handling, which is going to be very similar to what we just did. So similar that we're going to copy this catch code and we'll paste it inside of our register component right here. Now the difference here is we will say this.errors, since we might be getting back multiple, and change this to errors as well. And then add an errors property to our data. Now, in order to display this in the template, we'll add a UL. And on the LI, we will v-for through our errors, printing out each one. And if you see this linting error, that's because we need to be binding to a key. We'll simply do that by adding the index and binding to that. Great, now we're ready to check this out in the browser. If we log in with an email that already exists in our database and a password that is too short, we get both of these errors. And in case you're wondering, yes, the LIs are also globally styled to be read. If you're developing a production level application, I want to leave you with a few side notes. First, you'll notice that we didn't add any client-side form validation. You'll want to add that, and we cover that in our next level Vue course. Second, you'll also want to handle when the server is down. We also cover this in our next level Vue course. Third, I recommend you consider your security needs when displaying these error messages. For example, if you don't want someone knowing that the email that they're trying to log in with already exists in your database, then you probably shouldn't tell them that. And finally, if you're wondering why we didn't do any of this with Vuex, that's because we want to keep this error handling code scoped to the components that actually care about them. Now, if we had multiple components that actually cared about these errors, that's when we would move that into a global level with Vuex. After all, that's why we use Vuex, to share state amongst components. Great job. To review, we looked at the errors that our mock server is sending us, and then we implemented both login and register error handling. We'll see you in the next lesson where we'll take a look at automatic login. Now these are just some of the errors that might occur, Now these are just some of the errors that...
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral. You are in command now, Admiral Piet.
Thank you, Lord Vader.